29th, 2024. Joining today is Mr. Ganesh Maipal, Member of Parliament, Shadow Minister of Regional Development, and Mr. Elson Lowe, Treasurer of the People's National Congress Reform and Economist. Today's press statement will be read in two parts, and we will begin with the reading from Mr. Ganesh Maipal.
Thank you, Shanika, and good morning, members of the media. Under the PPP, the Guyana Police Force has become a national security risk and a compromised entity. Recent events involving the Guyana Police Force and its top leadership has increased public concerns that under the PPP, the Guyana Police Force is fast becoming a national security risk and a diminished and compromised crime-fighting force. Top officers are allegedly involved in various crimes. The force itself is the source of tip-offs and cover-ups in service of criminals. Other security and policing agencies, both local and foreign, intentionally bypass or ignore it. Crimes allegedly committed by government ministers and politically connected persons are swept under the carpet. The appointment of the police commissioner is still a constitutional breach, and public trust in the police force is at all-time low and dropping. Guyanese only have to glance at the news headlines and editorials to grasp the full extent of the crisis in the Guyana Police Force. For instance, Kaichor News headline of the 4th of September 2024, senior cop fingered in massive cocaine bust at Matthews Ridge. This should have resulted in an investigation. There was none. Stabrook News editorial of the 14th of September, the police had notably not been present during the Joint Guyana Defense Force, CANU DEA, on September 1st at Matthews Ridge, a clear indication that the Guyana Police Force is not trusted by other crime-fighting institutions. Kaichor News headline of the 6th of October, senior cop accused of sharing police intelligence with suspects in Brick's abduction case, a clear insinuation that the Guyana Police Force is complicit in crime. Demerara Wave of the 18th of October, Assistant Police Commissioner Brutus faces hundreds of charges involving almost Guyana $1 billion. The latest news is that he has been slapped with 30 charges. And as is known, we continue to maintain on good legal grounds that the appointment of Clifton Hicken as police commissioner would be unconstitutional and yet another display of disrespect by the PPP for the rule of law. Hicken is unfit to be commissioner of police. These developments at the top of the police force no longer surprise the Guyanese public, nor does the PPP's comfort with the situation. The PPP government continues to pretend as much as it could that the Guyana Police Force is a well-functioning institution. But the Guyanese people, as with so many other matters, are not fooled by PPP political spin and self-delusions. The PPP knows that the Guyana Police Force is failing the people of Guyana, but the PPP's own involvement in crime has made it impossible for it to implement needed reforms. On the specific issue of Assistant Police Commissioner Brutus, many Guyanese are rightfully questioning how is it possible for any citizen, much less a politically exposed person like the Assistant Commissioner of Police, to amass almost $1 billion of questionable resources without setting off money laundering or proceeds of crime red flags. Were the required suspicious activities reports compiled and presented to those in authority? If so, were they deliberately buried to conceal these potential proceeds of crime? At best, this means that the integrity and effectiveness of Guyana's anti-money laundering and proceeds of crime infrastructure is in serious doubt. And at worst, this could mean the entire system has been compromised by the PPP. Such a widespread failure raises the prospect of Guyana once again becoming blacklisted, which would cripple our financial system and economy. An investigation of this vulnerability needs to be conducted, and the system revamped to prevent such lapses. The fundamental and comprehensive reforms needed to overhaul the police force, like so much else in Guyana, demand that all political forces that desire change must work assiduously to defeat the PPP at the 2025 general and regional elections, since the crisis of governance in Guyana cannot be addressed by the present government, since it is one of the main sources of the extant crisis. As the next government, we are confident we will transform the Guyana police force into a professional, well-trained, highly motivated, and well-paid entity in service of the people.
Thank you. Mr. Elson Lowe.
It is absurd for Jaguar to compare the size of the PUP government expenditures with massive oil revenues with the coalition's expenditures with no oil money. DP Jaguar continues to peddle the deceptive fallacy. The PUP government's higher expenditure on infrastructure and social services is due to his government's so-called different priorities. But as everyone knows, PUP's larger expenditures are all associated directly and indirectly with the production of oil, which started when the coalition left office. These expenditures have little to do with any planning by the PUP government. As is plainly obvious, planning is alien to the PUP. The fact that, for example, that it has not produced any plan, it has none, to accompany its recent disjointed remarks about upgrading the botanical gardens and Georgetown is just another case of the PUP's haphazard approach to development. As our finale said in an interview this January, the PUP government makes its plans as it goes along, if at all. However, Guyanese must note several points with regards to Jaguar's grandstanding about the PUP's larger expenditures. One, our revenues themselves are a massive source of government finances. They have allowed the government to increase the national budget by several hundreds of billions of dollars every year since 2021. The government in 2023, for example, was able to return to the National Assembly for around $90 billion in added spending. This added money amounted to over 30% of the coalition's 2019 total expenditure. The PUP regime is the first government to have access to these large sums of money. What Guyanese are getting for these large sums is incompetence resulting in the most corruption in the history of Guyana, poor infrastructure work, discrimination in the allocation of the country's resources, and enrichment of PUP elite, their friends, families, and favorites. In addition, oil revenues allow the government to increasingly borrow more money locally and overseas. The minister responsible for finance reported in his 2024 budget speech, for instance, that, quote, Guyana's US 1.775.5 million at the end of 2023, Guyana's debt, up 13% from the position at the end of 2022, is on account of positive net flows from both bilateral and multilateral creditors. Domestic debt totaled US $2,733.4 million at the end of 2023, up from US $2,083 million at the end of 2022, an increase of almost 25%. This increased borrowing, facilitated by our oil wealth, also helps to finance the higher PUP expenditures. A third source of government financing is constituted by the higher revenue collection by the GRA, fueled mostly by oil-related business activities. Bank of Guyana half-year report for 2024 states that income tax, and I quote, income tax receipts increased by 21.8% to Guyana 129,791 million on account of a broader base of collections from oil and gas related firms. It also states that private corporation taxes rose by 21.1%. Bear in mind, these are half-year figures, but they point to the fact that the PPP has access to greater funds from increased revenue collection from oil-related businesses and has little to do with any involvement by the PPP. These sources of revenue are a natural spin-off from the discovery and production of oil and gas. So there is no doubt that the government has access to move revenues directly and indirectly from the oil sector, none of which the coalition government had. Guyanese must, however, note several other issues related to Jaguar's grandstanding about the PPP's higher expenditure. 1. Around 40% of the PPP's expenditure is wasted or lost through financial mismanagement, negligence, incomplete projects, and corruption. 2. The amount of money spent is far from the full story, as Jaguar wants us to believe. A more informative performance measure would be the outcomes and impacts on people's lives of these large expenditures. Jaguar must report to the nation on people's living standards and quality of life. He must report to the nation whether regular Guyanese are less hungry, desperate, hopeless, or frustrated. Such a report will make it very clear that the expenditures are not improving the people's quality of life and lifting them out of poverty. The government has failed to reduce the high cost of living, reduce poverty, and improve the quality of life of ordinary Guyanese. Even with access to massive oil revenues, tax collection, and higher borrowing, the PPP continues to fail the Guyanese people. Rather than flying over housing schemes to measure progress, as Jaguar claimed he did, he should instead measure the poverty rate, the unemployment rate, the migration rate, the infant and maternal mortality rate, the CXC pass rate, the school attendance rate in hinterland regions, the nutrition intake of children, the happiness index, as a few examples. He should do a comprehensive analysis of wages and salaries in the Caribbean, with wages and salaries in Guyana. But those measures would not fit his narrative of deception and spin doctoring. The coalition government has an impressive record of achievement without a dime of oil money. Our people-centered development strategy will improve the quality of life of all Guyanese.
Thank you.
The next statement. The third audit must not repeat the failings of the second audit. Guyanese have continually been frustrated by the PPP's stance on auditing offshore oil expenses. It has varied from casual irresponsibility to allegations of corruption and incompetence. With the signing of the third audit agreement, it is time that the PPP provides Guyanese with the kind of diligent, responsible governance they deserve. This is even more urgent given this third audit must interrogate some of the costs associated with the gas energy project pipeline, which has itself been steeped in controversy. These are the minimum standards required of this third audit. 1. There should be a clear, concise summary which typical Guyanese can read and understand. B. Critical issues like whether interest is being charged and the total amount in dispute must be comprehensively addressed. C. Costs related to the natural gas pipeline must be addressed separately and robustly. We remind the Guyanese that the cost of the pipeline tripled in a short period of time. This change in the cost of the project must be accounted for transparently. D. Disputed costs must be addressed clearly and in a way that allows for swift action in the event arbitration is necessary. E. The operator must be held to high standards when it comes to the provision of information and responses to auditor questions. F. The scope of the audit must not neglect the reasonableness of costs, rather than merely identifying whether they are eligible to be recovered. G. There should be a defined timeline for the completion and release of the audit. If the PPP wants to show the Guyanese people that it takes seriously its sacred duty to safeguard the nation's resources, it will follow these standards and recommendations, even if that means re-engaging the auditors to expand or otherwise adjust the terms of reference for the audit. We want to stress that billions of US are at stake, and Guyanese cannot hope to benefit fully from the oil industry without a robust audit culture. Tragically, the PPP has thus far been wedded to a totally unpatriotic attitude. We remind them that these resources are not their personal resources to fritter away as they please, but belong to all Guyanese. In contrast, we have released a 20-point plan for the oil and gas industry, which includes robust auditing, the establishment of an advisory council, the development of a petroleum commission, and the building of capacity to audit within the GRA. Guyanese cannot afford to continue to see proceeds from oil squandered by the PPP's utter neglect. Our 20-point plan, therefore, represents a new path forward for the nation's oil and gas industry. When in government, we commit to doing everything in our power to ensure offshore oil expense audits are of the highest standard. Thank you.
Thank you. At this time, I'll take questions on the press statement. Ms. Davina.
Hi, good morning. This is Bobby Cartridges. Mr. Michael, earlier you mentioned that there are instances where crimes allegedly committed by ministers, for instance, have been swept under the rug by the Ghana police force. But do you have any examples, any instances of those that you can share with the media? Thanks.
Well, there are various, thank you, Davina. There are various allegations surrounding the operations of ministers and how they are facilitated by the Guyana Police Force. What I will endeavor to do is to, like I did in the press statement, to quote several of these articles and so on. I will endeavor to put together a package per se that consists of definitive allegations and released to you and others. But we must never forget that the whole incident with Sue and Barrett Jaglio, which was publicly put out there by Vice News, that is a crime by itself that requires investigation. And there are other incidents also that I'm sure we can point to, which we will most likely release. We must never forget the Dharamlal situation also. He was a minister, and it's public pressure that really caused them to take action. But this same individual is still so deeply connected, as we see in the on social media in region number 5 and how he operates. And he was even elected to one of the high offices there at the PPP Congress. But outside of that, I'll give you something more detailed in writing.
Thank you very much. Just a brief follow-up. In relation to the Vice News piece that was done, those allegations that were leveled against the Vice President, can you say if the opposition ever made an official report to the police for an investigation to be done?
Yes, I am aware that a letter was dispatched requesting an investigation, and a letter was sent to Commissioner Acting Hicken, and I'm also aware of the opposition notifying the international community also in connection with that Vice News release. And may I remind you that it was Jaglio himself, I think, on that interview that indicated that an investigation would be done to ascertain the veracity of the allegations that the journalist was putting to him in connection with his link to Chinese companies and so on. And nothing has been done. We must not, and then when you see this hypocrite comes on at his press conferences on Thursday talking about they will not tolerate any form of corruption and they will act within the best interest. That was one that was clearly exposed him. And to date, nothing. We don't even know anything about it. And they're trying to sweep it under the rug. But it is something that will have to remain in the minds of Guyanese until questions are answered. And that remains very, very evident as a government official in the vice president engaging in what was alleged there as corruption.
Thank you. Questions on the press statement? All right, I have one in room.
When you were going through the statement, Yes. When you were going through the statement, you noted that the vice president should do a comprehensive analysis of the KPIs, but these have primarily been positive um, statistics that have been reported by the government and also international organizations. So, what what is the metric that you guys are using to measure, these outcomes?
Thank you very much for your question. Uh, Eagle-eyed Guyanese will have observed something that we've called into question, which is that the unemployment rate has not been published for several years for Guyana. So it is, of course, impossible for there to be positive reporting on a statistic which is not being published. That is critical if we're going to get any sense of A, what is going on in terms of people getting jobs in Ghana, but B, what is going on in terms of the increase in or decrease in wages in Ghana, which is a critical issue, especially given the cost of living crisis. We've also mentioned at length that the inflation number that the government has put forward is extremely questionable. Government also doesn't seem to know be able to make up its own mind as to what the inflation number will be. It indicated they expected 2.5% inflation this year. The Bank of Ghana report has indicated we're likely to have inflation higher than that. And last year, we even saw the government come out to say there was virtually no inflation. I think it was 2% inflation when the US government and the IMF indicated numbers twice that level. Therefore, indicating that the price of goods has continued to go up and the cost of living crisis has continued to be very significant. If you don't know your inflation number and your unemployment number, it's very difficult for you to be able to govern a country. Those are key metrics that the international community would look at, that central banks would look at, that finance ministries would look at across the world. For the government, not to have questionable numbers, and then B, not to publish numbers is really ridiculous. There are very few countries other than Ghana that do not publish an unemployment number. Maybe North Korea doesn't publish unemployment numbers. Some dictatorships under the Soviet Union, under the Soviet bloc, maybe wouldn't have published unemployment numbers. It's hard to name something like that. So that just gives you an idea of how absurd the situation is right now. We've also seen reporting from, I believe it's PAHO, international institutions, regarding the level of childhood malnutrition in Ghana, where Ghana is one of the countries in the region with the highest level of childhood malnutrition. We've also seen reporting regarding the poverty rate in Ghana from UNICEF, from UNICEF, which indicated that I believe it was 43% poverty at the time. These are really troubling figures, and the government has not carried out a poverty survey, as we have urged that they carry out, to be able to assess what is going on. Rather, they seem to be making the assumption that just because they're providing contracts to people, that the unemployment rate has fallen and everything is rosy. But as any economist would tell you, it really depends. And of course, it is difficult for the government to say that there's progress for Guyanese when the cost of living crisis has come at the same time that we don't have information on employment. That's beyond unacceptable. And frankly, it means that it's difficult to take the government seriously when it talks about progress without having basic data like that.
Thank you. I see a name by Mr. Abel. Could you state your full name and media house?
Good morning. You guys hear me?
Yes, we're hearing you.
Good morning. Jermaine Abel here, regional media from St. Kitts.
Thank you.
I have a couple of questions. One, just going back to the discussion surrounding the state of the economy, unemployment, economic growth, and so forth. The IMF in its report recently indicated that outside of the oil and gas sector, the country is seeing just about double-digit growth. And the inflation rate remains relatively stable at 2%, 3% thereabout. Can you guys go into a little bit more specifics? I know you're talking about all the figures and so forth, but specifics. What would you want to see the government focus on, the government's priority area in terms of mitigating the challenges that we're seeing right now in the country, more specifically, the rising food prices that we're seeing?
Thank you very much for your question. I think it is good for us to lay out some specifics. We have, of course, spoken many times at press conferences on the measures we think are necessary for the cost of living crisis to be dealt with. We would also point out that the food inflation number has been much higher than the overall inflation number for many years. And that means that lower income Guyanese are suffering more or suffering disproportionately. The reason for this is, of course, that lower income people spend a disproportionate share of their budget on food because, of course, they're just trying to get by day to day. So that has been particularly difficult for lower income Guyanese. So we've spoken about the need to expand agriculture in this country. I saw a recent media report that indicated that Guyana's food bill continues to grow despite the government's promises that they're going to deal with the food import bill, that they're going to reverse those numbers and become an exporter of all food stuff. But clearly that plan is off the rails. What we think needs to be done is this. We believe, first of all, that the government has not had enough focus on making use of natural gas to produce fertilizer. So we think that, first of all, it needs to be a study, and second of all, that once that study gives the all clear, which we believe it should, but once that study gives the all clear, we should be moving forward with producing fertilizer and providing free fertilizer or low-cost fertilizer to farms across this country. We have recently heard from ExxonMobil that the gas pipeline has been completed ahead of schedule. If a fertilizer plant had been developed parallel to that pipeline, while the pipeline was being developed, we could have already seen Guyana begin to produce fertilizer, which would have allowed us to ease the cost of living crisis as we close out the year and into the new year. That's the first thing. The second thing is we've spoken about the need to develop agriculture across the regions in Guyana because we see transportation costs as one of the core costs when it comes to the high cost of living in the country. And so if you have regional agriculture, then you'll be able to have less transportation and needs and therefore lower costs. Following on that, we've also mentioned that we believe that fuel vouchers should be provided to canter operators and those transporting food from farm to market to ensure that they face lower costs and can therefore provide consumers with lower cost food. We've also spoken about the need to provide farmers with grants of $10 million or so to ensure that they can buy equipment to improve their productivity and expand their production. So that is something that we also believe will have a major impact. We've also spoken about the Small Business Bureau and the need for that bureau to offer more finance, to be much larger in terms of its funding, so that businesses can grow and therefore add supply to the market. So there's a range of measures that we've spoken about that the government has not been interested in, not listened to. We would note that at the beginning of the year in the national budget, only $7 billion was put towards direct cost of living mitigation measures, which is not even 1% of the national budget. Since from that point, we raised the alarm, we've been raising the alarm that that's not sufficient to deal properly with the cost of living crisis. And of course, I think what has demonstrated that the government understands, or at least has internalized it, we have an idea of what to do, is that one of the measures we mentioned, which is the distribution of the $60 billion that Guyana earned unexpectedly due to the war in Ukraine. We've been calling for that to be distributed from the time that we earned that money, but the government has now followed us and decided that they're going to distribute that money. However, because of course they're looking to copycat, they haven't really understood the way that distribution should be approached, and it has resulted in all sorts of chaos. The number changing, the categories changing, the eligibility changing. Who knows? Maybe by next week, it might be $40,000 per person, given that people abroad are now able to access this. Probably 500,000 Guyanese can access it. So that it gives you an indication that the opposition has clear plans as to how to approach the cost of living crisis and expanding agriculture. We have additional things that we've mentioned in other presses. But on the other hand, the government, has failed to expand in the way that they indicated they wanted to expand, and B, doesn't seem to have a clear idea of what to do. The last note I would say is the IMF number you're quoting, I'm not sure if that's a half-year number. I would have to check that. Last I saw was, I think, a 4.5% projected inflation or something like that, but I'll have to double check on that one.
And let me add also to what all that Elson said, and to say that one of the biggest problem Guyana faces in terms of easing the cost of living crisis is the government having an effective structure to ensure that the wealth of the country, when being distributed in whatever way, shape, or form, whether it is through the cash grant distribution, or whether it is through the Small Business Bureau, or whether it is through the Sustainable Livelihood Entrepreneurship Development Program, there is no system or structure that can effectively ensure that it is distributed in an equitable manner where the vulnerable and the persons who are most in need are really and truly the recipients. And then you have the issue where uh, because of this, because there is no structure, there is an ad hocracy in terms of who is being engaged to facilitate the distribution. I make reference, for example, to the COVID-19 cash grant distribution that we had in 2021. And that was done in such a way where a lot of people, ordinary, hardworking, tax-paying Guyanese, did not benefit because the families did not benefit because of the system that they had. It wasn't anything that could have guaranteed accountability and transparency. But instead, what we saw, persons who were engaged, who were politically aligned to the People's Progressive Party, they ended up renovating their homes, they ended up buying cars, they ended up engaging in a set of activities that were outside of their norm. And a lot of other persons were left with their pink slip. I turn now to the Small Business Bureau. In the budget, there is probably about $1 billion or thereabout that this government has expended for small businesses to be given grants and to assist them in reducing their expenses and so on. But there is no accountability and transparency measure to show that it was done in a way where who really had to benefited. And you also have the Sustainable Livelihood Entrepreneurship Development Program, billions of dollars there also, but where the money is shown on paper that it is expended, the money is shown that it was distributed or given out and so on. But where is the project document to show the investment and how is this business growing? Is it impacting the society? Are the ordinary citizens benefiting from these monies and programs that are supposed to be assisting them? And when you walk around the country and you speak to the ordinary people, you speak to the people who are not within the friends, families, and favorites of the People's Progressive Party, you hear of how they're struggling to make ends meet. And it's all because of no structure in the distribution of the wealth to ensure and guarantee accountability, transparency, and good governance. That's the sad reality.
Thank you. I see the hand of Mr. Brian.
He has posted a question whether there is an update.
Okay, I'm seeing it here. I just saw it here, but this is outside of the press statement, so um, I'm now seeing this. So if he has a question on the press statement, he can go ahead. If not, Mr. Harris, you're next. Mr.
Yes,
Harris.
good morning, everybody. Two questions. One for Mr. Lowe, one for Mr. Naipaul. Mr. Lowe, how do you calculate expenditure? And I'm asking this because a lot of contracts have been awarded. No work is being done. The pre-contract is one such, and there are others. Would you consider that an expenditure? How is it calculated? And for Mr. Maipal, you were talking about the appointment of the acting commissioner, assistant commissioner, Clifton Hicken. Why do you believe that the government is so stupid as to go ahead with that appointment when all indications show that such an appointment would be unconstitutional?
Thank you very much for your question, Mr. Harris. What the government does is it provides advance payments, and in some instances, vast majority of the amount for a particular project to contractors, even when contractors have not done work or not done sufficient work, and that has been a very concerning issue. We've also seen them have to run back to the treasury repeatedly to increase the amounts that contractors are provided, A, because they clearly did not plan properly, and B, because there's some questions regarding the quality of the contractors. So there's monies that are being put out there into the Guyanese economy in that way. However, they're not making their way into the economy in the form of jobs and so on, because a lot of those works are not being done on time, not being done in the way that they should be done. You will note that there are several extensive delays that we've seen with contracts, that we've also seen some contracts be so delayed that other contractors have had to take them over. That, of course, again, is an indication that the money is not being spent to properly boost the economy, but rather that that money is falling by the wayside, so to speak, and that new contractors now have to take that up, and they themselves will ask for additional budgetary sums. And this is compounded by, and this is the other end of things, because the assumption that economists would make is when you build out infrastructure, there'll be a return on it. So roads will give you a return and so on. But if these roads have to be fixed almost the moment that they're built, a couple of weeks after they're built, you've got the road that runs a bit in front of Congress Place here, in front of Prashad Nagar and Lamar Gardens and so on. That road has only been constructed a couple of months ago, and you're already seeing deep potholes, and you're seeing it begin to sink into the trench. That is also an indicator that rather than the roads having a net positive effect as we would expect, we're starting to see losses because you have to go and fix that road, which will be another hundreds of millions or whatever it is again. So that is why, while money is there, money is being spent, money is being allocated, you're not seeing the returns that you would normally see from that kind of spending.
So, Adam, you're asking me, why do I believe? I actually wrote it down. Why do I believe the government is so stupid to go ahead with that appointment? Now, I think I have to make it very clear that I have had several interactions with Clifton Hicken, the acting commissioner of police. And personally, I do not have any animosity or anything against the gentleman. It is just sad that he happens to be in that position, acting as the top cop, sitting in the chair with all the authority that comes with it. And the Guyana police force really went down. And I say that because I interact a lot with members of the force, and their morals are not, it's so low. And then you see this big scandal with Brutus that is out there. There are so many other allegations that within the Guyana police force, the deployment of the SWAT team, the killing of the gentleman in Essequibo, of which we still don't know who deployed the police team that went there, or in Boston, I think is the name. I remember the case at Golden Grove, another incident that occurred there, nothing clear cut coming out of it. And there's so many other issues that one can point to that has happened under Clifton Hickens' watch. And that is why I can't fathom the thought of having in my head the seriousness behind confirming him as commissioner of police. I honestly think in the portfolio as acting commissioner of police, he has failed the nation. So I don't know what is it that we are going to put high praises up for him. Look at simple traffic. The simplest one is the abuse of the red and blue lights on vehicles on our roadways. Any and everybody, once they can afford to buy a luxury vehicle, an SUV, they slap on a red and blue light, purchase it from the Chinese store, and they just come through with sirens, disrupting the entire flow of traffic, abusing that. That's against the law. And the Guyana police force is doing absolutely nothing about it. But outside of all of these infractions, Hickens' silence in the force as the head. That is what bothers me and bothers the opposition. His silence. You're not seeing a man who really wants to take control of the Guyana police force. You're not seeing a man who really wants to demonstrate the force being apolitical. You're not seeing a man who really wants to reform, strengthen, and put to the highest of order the Guyana police force as an organ to serve and protect. Instead, what you're seeing is that he's going around to several political activities with the president and ministers of government. Instead, what you're seeing is a smokescreen of holding a set of activities in areas, Christmas gift handout, toy drive, and those kind of things. And you're seeing public engagement, which is good, no complaints about that. But that for me is a distraction. And the main issue, the main focus of the Guyana police force before engaging in all of that which is important there that I spoke of, the main issue is to get their house in order. And I think he should have been center in terms of getting his house in order. It is a slap in the face of the public to know that the SWAT team, as I said before, was deployed to Assistant Commissioner Brutus' home, and we don't know who deployed the team. And Hicken is not telling us anything. And there's so many other things that have happened that has caused us. But coming back to the PPP wanting to conform him, let's not forget that several of the people who are in high offices in the PPP, they're in the media for the wrong reason too, right? We can look at Brentnell Ashley from Region 1. If you Google his name, you can see that there's some very not nice things that will show up. If you look at Alistair Charlie from Region 9, of course, Nigel Darmlal, infamous as that is, even Vice President Jaglio, we know of all the other scandals that surround his name, Berry Ramsaran, and Kelowin Lal. I could name them. There's so many people that I can name within the People's Progressive Party that is notoriously known to the Guyanese people. And they're involved in high offices. They're appointed to high offices. So the PPP basically have a track record of wanting to put square pegs in wrong hole. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Abel?
Hi, thanks. I have one question, but it's two parts. There's a lot of talk here about corruption, and it's rightly so because corruption, or this discussion of corruption surrounding some of the national issues. But my question is direct towards Mr. Mahdi Paul and the others within the opposition ranks. There's a school of thought that APNUFC did not do enough to an extent to put legislation in place to tackle these things, not only when we're in government, but going forward. How could you respond to those criticisms that you're talking about this now, but legislation should have been put in place, whether or not it be at to tackle it from government level, integrity in public life, legislation give it more teeth to tackle these issues, as well as it trickling towards the other apparatus within the government, whether it be police force or any other part of the government. And this is more of a blunt question to you. Would the opposition take any blame for not having these legislations in place?
All right, thank you very much. Let me start by saying to you that the legislations that are in place requires also the human side, which happens to be the people who execute and basically ensure that it is followed. And I'm going to start with simply the Procurement Act of our country, the Procurement Act of 2003. The Procurement Act of 2003 was drafted to ensure that contracts are awarded in a transparent manner. And when it was drafted and passed in the National Assembly, it was being followed, so to speak. I think in 2006 or thereabout, when it came in, you had the formation, the composition, and so on. When the APNU AFC came to office in 2015, we ensured that the spirit of that legislation was followed. Spirit of it being followed in the sense that if you look at the regional tender boards, the law says that two of the members must come from the regional administration, the regional democratic council. Region 1 is won by the PPP and they elect their two. Their council elect their two. Region 2 elected their two. Region 3 elected their two. Region 4 elected their two, straight to Region 10. That is what happened in 2015 to 2020. So the legislation was followed. There is an oversight on the committee then. So at all these regions, you had the chairperson being the REO of the region. You had two other members being selected by the National Tender Board, and the RDCs select their two. So in Region 1, there were PPP representation, and you also had the government representation, 2015 to 2020 I'm talking about, going right through the 10 administrative regions. So there was always a PPP site there. 2020 to now, there is no APNU or AFC representation at these respective tender boards that were elected by APNU AFC councils. APNU AFC together, they won regions 4, 7, and 10. And we do not have any representation there. Instead, what the PPP did is to use a technicality in the term of the law that says regional administration. And they're saying the regional administration means the REO must choose the two. So for Region 4, 7, and 10, the REO chose the two to sit on the tender board. But for 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 8, and 9, the councils that are dominated by the PPP elected their two. So they have used a technicality there to say it's not the RDC. I now point you to the Guyana Police Force. We had, under our time, we started off with David Ramnarine, who was, I believe, honestly, a man that was very serious in terms of trying to put the force in order. We went through the consultation process the Constitution speaks to, and that is how Leslie James was appointed Commissioner of Police. And the politicians of the AP and USC, we divided ourselves of interfering with the manner in which the police force was being administered. And no commander of any region, or even Leslie James as commissioner, can stand and say that there was political interference or ministers calling them or the president calling, directing. Nobody can, they can't stand and say that. So it was a matter of respecting what is enshrined in the law. What we have found now, coming to opposition, is the abuse of the loopholes, if I may use that term. And you find the abuse of where the legislations are basically silent. The PPP gives it their own interpretation and they abuse the powers and privileges there. So what that does now is that it gives us the opportunity to recognize where is it that they are abusing this format, and we have to correct it. Once we get back there, we will have to correct it, because clearly the PPP has no intentions of operating within the spirit of the legislation. They only seek to find the loophole and abuse it to their own likeness.
I'd also want to add to that we need to make it clear that there were significant legislative actions taken and significant actions taken when it comes to justice in this country under the APNU AFC time in office. We saw, and that really began with adherence to the United Nations Convention Against Corruption. We saw the establishment of the State Asset Recovery Agency, which was required by the United Nations Convention Against Corruption, that kind of facility. We also saw even the current president face 19 charges, I believe it was, as well as the current Minister of Finance face charges. So it is not that things were not done, that laws were not passed, that actions were not taken. Rather, actions were taken, but we have seen, of course, those charges be dropped now that there's been a change in who's in office. You've seen the SARA closed. We've not seen an agency be established to help the country to be in compliance, proper compliance with the United Nations Convention Against Corruption. Rather, those efforts have been dashed to the side. There's also now serious question, which is what we're pointing to in the press statement, around the issue of Guyana's anti-money laundering infrastructure, because how someone so senior in the police force could amass this much money in his accounts without triggering any alarms is a real question. Now, of course, it could be that the money is legitimate and he'll be exonerated, but that amount of money would imply, I don't know, 100 different red flags that should have been raised. So therefore, what we're trying to indicate is that there are A, mechanisms that were put in place, but B, enforcement is really critical when it comes to these types of issues.
Thank you. All right, at this time, I will take, go ahead.
Yeah. Final question from me. You mentioned, Mr. Lowe, the achievements of the coalition government. Can you list some of those achievements for us?
Sure. One achievement that I always like to point out is that the coalition government saw a sharp increase in the mathematics pass rate at CSEC, which brought us up to, I believe it's 48% was the high water mark, and we had more than 1 year with a high rate. We've seen the mathematics pass rate fall all the way down to, I think it's 31% this year, despite the government spending a budget that is far higher, almost double the budget that we spent on education. We also saw the establishment of a sovereign wealth fund under the APNU. We also saw, as I said, a nation being brought into compliance with the United Nations Convention Against Corruption. We saw improvements in maternal mortality rates under the coalition government. We saw, of course, therefore, an improved healthcare sector under the coalition government. We saw, without oil, a growth rate that was the highest in the Caribbean for several years on end under the coalition government. And we saw an inflation rate that was extremely low under the coalition government, that therefore meant that the cost of living was much lower. So there's a wide range of accomplishments we can speak to, and I can keep going. We saw Gaisuco producing 5 times as much sugar as it's producing right now, give or take a little bit. There's endless things that we can speak on, but I hope that those give you a sense of some of the core accomplishments or some of the accomplishments I can name off the top of my head today.
And you know, when you want to do, and I must make this point, when you want to do a comparison in terms of achievements, in terms of budgetary allocations, in terms of what the coalition did from 2015 to really 2019, because and if you're to take full budgets into consideration to 2016, 2017, 2018, and 2019 budgets. Those 4 budgets were full budgets of the APNU AFC. And when you want to do a comparison of what was done by the coalition, you cannot compare it. I think Elson made that point in his statement also. You cannot compare it to 2020 to 2024. Sometimes I wonder if 2015 was when Guyana gained its independence, and then we started to have our own government. What happened? Did we not have governments before that? And I'm not just isolating it to the PPP government 92 to 2015. It goes back to, so you have to look at it from that perspective that the APNU really, APN UFC, we never really spent, well, we never spent oil money, but we were still able to show improvement in education, in infrastructure, and all the likes, in healthcare and social services and the likes. We were very, very strong behind the increase in old age pension. For those who may not remember, it was 2011 when there was that compromise between Donald Ramotar and David Granger with the Hung Parliament that moved old age pension from 7,500 that the PPP had it for so long to, I think it was 13,100. It was a compromise and a dialogue that happened at that level because the opposition had a one-seat majority in the National Assembly. We must never forget the PPP was stifling us with minimum wage at, I think, $35,000. The coalition came in and I think we left it at 74 or thereabout. And then you had the income tax. I think the PPP had it at 33 and 1/3, and it was reduced to 28%, if if I stand corrected. But there's so many things that they had left us with in 2014 that we made significant improvement with at the end of 2019, 2020. If I see my who's it? I think it's Priya Manik Chan that is gallivanting, saying that they're building schools. Oh, 20 schools, 30 schools. How many schools they're building? Yes, you got the oil money, build and build more. But you have to ensure that you populate those schools, not only with children and teachers. You need to have social workers there. You need to have an environment that is conducive. But from 2015, what she's not saying is the deplorable state that the education sector was in when we came to power. We had to focus our resources on what was there, improving the infrastructure that was there. I can point to you and tell you in Region 3, for example, right at Wales, if you see a 2014 picture of what Wales Primary School was, you will thank the coalition for where it is right now. And that is why they don't have to go spend money there, because we left them with a brand new state-of-the-art school, so to speak. Philadelphia, a new school was built. Virgin Nugent, an extension was done to cater for more children. Wakenham, a series of renovation. So the state that the PPP had this country in 2014 required us to improve what was there. And now that they have gotten better infrastructure from what they had left in 2014, they have the scope now to go and spend elsewhere to develop. But they're not doing it in a manner that is structured. They're not doing it with transparency. They're not doing it with accountability, nor good governance. It's all about filling their pockets with their friends, their families, and their favorites. The sad reality.
Thank you. All right, with there being no other questions, I want to thank once again our media personnel for joining today's press conference, and of course our viewing audience on all our platforms. We do hope you have a great rest of the week, and we'll see you a little later in the week. Thank you.